This is George Otterby, chairman for the organization. A little history here. Last year, I was out in Abiquiu, New Mexico, and visited and found there was a connection with our family to Abiquiu. And that connection opened up all kinds of doors for me. And because of that, when I seen Dr. Moises Gonzales's book, I seen a need for us to take the next step to see how we can get additional information on our heritage. And Moises Gonzales, who's going to be speaking today, is an associate professor of urban design in community and regional planning at the School of Architecture and Planning at the University of New Mexico. He is a Hensenero, heir of both the Cañón de, you have to help me with this, Carnu land grant, Canue, and the San Antonio de las Huertas land grant. He currently serves on the board of trustees for, again, Canue land grant, and has written several books. Oh, okay, on the Hensenero settlement of New Mexico. He is a Danzen of the Michoacan and Comanche traditions. Oh, I had something pop up here in front of your bio. But first of all, Dr. Gonzales, I really appreciate you presenting today. And in fact, I have a master's degree in urban planning also. And we're going to have to talk. Yeah, we're going to have to talk because I did my master's thesis on using census tract data. And hopefully that we can do some more research here in the future in regards to our community. But yes, I'm so impressed with you and what you've written. And I want to tell everybody that his book is available. He'll give you the way to be able to purchase his book and share with you the awesome information that they've been able to pull together on this community. And I'm so honored and proud to have you here today. So Dr. Gonzales, it's yours.
All right. Well, thank you for the invitation. I know when we originally had talked about having me do this talk, it was, we kind of threw out the idea that it would be live in Pueblo, and that was before COVID hit. So I'm glad we were able to come back to this conversation. So what I want to do is just give you a little bit of background about myself, the concept of the book, and then show some images about some of the different Genízaro communities and rituals. And then we have Virginia Sanchez, who I think has a lot to, and then in the talk, I'll turn it over for a few minutes to Virginia to talk about her chapter, because I think it really connects to the history and the legacy of New Mexican migrations into Colorado, and then also kind of what was going on at the time of some of the kind of the forced removals of the Utes in that area. So and so she'll highlight her chapter, and then I'll close it up, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, or in conversation and dialogue. So the book I'm going to be presenting is called Nacion Genizara. It's the ethnogenesis, place and identity in New Mexico. Enrique La Madrid and I are the co-editors, and so we have various contributors and authors. I have another book with Bill Pyatt, and it's called Slavery in the Southwest. That book is also out, and I'm currently working on my book, another book that is I'm actually working on it right now, and that's going to be called Genízaro Consciousness. It's kind of like how does consciousness in terms of identity relate to as it's relevant to Genízaro identity today. So that's kind of the current book I'm working on. So again, yes, so first I'll start out with a little bit of background. My name is, well, you got my name, more so my Genízaro identity came from my grandparents from the base of the Sandia Mountains, who were, you know, my grandma's family really are today we have I'll talk a little bit about the matachines. I don't know if you've heard the matachine dance from New Mexico. It's done in a lot of the Pueblo communities, and it's done in some of the Genízaro communities too, particularly in mine and the mountain. My grandma's family was pretty much the ones that kept a lot of that dance tradition alive. I'm also on my grandpa's side, a lot of the because of his Genízaro background, a lot of the Comanche traditions that I'll talk a little bit about that still relate to a lot of the Genízaro communities today, in terms of some of the activities that we were doing, in terms of some of the information. So I'm gonna go into that in a minute. So a little bit about background of Genízaros. I don't know how many of you come across that. Those folks that come across it, I guess the Genízaro connection to Colorado is definitely by way of the diaspora, I guess, or out of migrations out of New Mexico into southern Colorado. Even at the early kind of the Mexican period, the land grant period, that where folks were migrating that way. And then of course, even the kind of the economics that shifted in New Mexico. For example, on my mom's side, my grandpa was from Cañón de Chama, and his mom was actually from the Pueblo de Abiquiu. You know, just because of the way the land grants happened, he landed up migrating. His family landed up, well, he was actually a migrant potato picker, right? So he was a migrant farm worker that, you know, his dad died. He was, him and his brothers had to help out. So they migrated in Colorado, part of that, that migrant farm worker kind of condition, or, you know, the steel workers that left places like Las Vegas, New Mexico, you know, a lot of your families probably connect to that landed up working in the steel mills in places like Pueblo, right? So there's a lot of those connections that you may be connected to. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'll give you a background about Genízaros, and then I'll kind of jump into the book and the framework of the book. So Genízaros in New Mexico, in terms of, and we talk about in the book, they come in, there's different segments of Genízaros and connections to Genízaros. One of the things that's seldomly talked about in New Mexico or in New Mexico history is the impact of slavery, right? We act like, you know, there's always kind of like, not really talked about in terms of the amount of slavery or the amount of captives that were going in various ways, and how it produced the Genízaro. So I'll give some background before I get into the book. In a nutshell, the definition of Genízaro is somebody, primarily in the 18th century, it was somebody mainly of the borderlands, Plains, Kiowa, Comanche, Ute, Navajo, Apache, people that were through interwarfare with, you know, during the, after the kind of in the early 18th century, what happened is you had these exchange of folks going in different ways, right? We know that the Navajo and Dene folks had a lot of captives. In fact, in the current population of the Dene Navajo, they even have a clan called the Nakai Dene, which is the Nakai means the Mexican clan, which were all the captive Mexicans that landed up within being part of and raised within the Navajo people. So that's an example, right? And then what happened, so just to kind of give you kind of lay it on a timeline. So there was the Pueblo Revolt in 1698. And the fallout of the Pueblo Revolt happened, a lot of things happened, right? So one of the ways in which the leader of one of the main leaders, Pope of the Pueblo Revolt from Okeawinge, is he saw the way in which to preserve Pueblo culture was to eliminate and go back to non-Catholic, mainly beliefs in the Pueblo religion, get away with the colonial factors that were impeding on Pueblo religion, and even the agricultural crops and even the animals, right? So after the Pueblo revolt, Pope has a lot of animals that he kind of pushes out towards the northeastern part of New Mexico, right? And so the Navajo landed adopting the sheep and transforming Navajo culture along the sheep. So even herding, the ways in which the Navajo adopted the sheep, or how the sheep influenced Navajo textiles. I mean, we wouldn't even have the sort of influences if it wasn't the kind of the adaptation, right? Then what were pushed out to the North Taos into southern Colorado, out towards the northern plains where the Kiowas started adapting the horse, and then to eastern New Mexico, northeastern New Mexico. The Comanche were the ones that really adopted and transformed to the horse culture that it became, right? The equestrian culture. So by the time, by the mid 18th century, what had happened is you had massive amounts of population of the Utes that were equestrian based. You had the Comanche had totally transformed their culture into an equestrian culture. So basically the raids that were going on between the Navajo, the Utes, the Kiowa, largely the Comanche, by the mid 18th century, New Mexico was barely hanging on by a string, right? Because of these influx of equestrian-based people. In fact, you may even know the story because it goes into Colorado history, is de Anza's moved from being the governor of California, brought to New Mexico to take on Cuerno Verde as the chieftain. They have a battle over by current day by Pueblo, right? Greenhorn Peak. Its original name is Cuerno Verde, in memory of Cuerno Verde, who was the chieftain. Once de Anza defeats Cuerno Verde, he's able to form an alliance between the Comanche to have them stop raiding as long as they work in cooperation. And so what forms after that is the Ute-Comanche alliance, right? Then what happens is you have several governors like Tomas Velez Gachupin in particular. He saw a vision. He said, so by the time you had, or let's just paint a picture. At this time, you had the wealthy families that had many servants of Genízaros, right? We even had wandering groups of Genízaros. And we'll talk about one of the chapters that talks about this. So you had wandering groups that in 1733, there was a petition to the governor of New Mexico by Genízaros to get their own land grant, and they petitioned the land at Sandia. The governor turned it down because he wanted to move some of the Kiowas that had abandoned to Hopi and move them back. So he denied the land grant, and then but later on, those folks were eventually given the land grant of Belen, right? And in this petition in 1733, we call this, and we talk about this in the book, and I'll go to the end of the chapters. I'm just doing the background part of the presentation now, is that they even as early as 1733, Genízaros really felt themselves as a separate identity and culture, separate from Spanish Hispano settlements, and even separate than the Pueblos. And in their petition to the for their own communities, they started saying that, well, we're different indigenous people, we're different than the Pueblos, and we're different than this, and we're and that's where we call, again, the ethnogenesis. Ethnogenesis is the term when a group of people start create actually it's when people realize that they are their own ethnic group and they exist as a people. So 1733, in that petition, we start seeing the formations of Genízaro identity as a people. even even into by the late 1700s, you start seeing priests refer to the Genízaros, and this is a direct quote from Father Morphy. He even said, como eran un Nacion Genizara. And that's why we call the book, because by many priests and governors start referring to the Genízaros as a nation, as a people, right? As their own people. To now just focus on Tomás Vélez Gachupin. He's a really interesting guy in New Mexican history, because he sees, rather than these Genízaros, again, some of them are even almost seen as gypsies. They don't have land, and maybe they work sometimes, maybe they don't. They're just almost operating like gypsies. They're not even kind of like, they don't have no lands to themselves. So what Tomás Vélez Gachupin, he starts seeing this architecture of settlements, so to speak. He creates an idea of creating, if you take the middle Rio Grande Valley from the Villa de Albuquerque, even all the way up to the Santa Cruz de la Cañada, he basically envisions of Ringa settlements westward out towards what would be present day Grants, to borderland the Navajos or that area, the way to buffer out the Ute territories, buffer out the Comanche and the Apache territories, and even down south. So then there's, even though he didn't do the Belen, Belen is the first Genízaro land grant around 1754. Tomás Vélez Gachupin sets up the Abiquiu land at the Pueblo de Abiquiu, and the way that's done is, again, the priest and the governor are working in tandem to move Hopi Tewas that were in the Hopi area in the area of called Hano, which is was a Tiwa Tewa speaking pueblo that was mainly happened from the migrations that are before the Pueblo revolt from the Tano Indians, the Tano Pueblo people, and the Tiwas and the Tewas that migrated out to that. Some of the Hopi Tewas wanted to come back. So basically, Tomás Vélez Gachupin and the priests, they moved 14 families to what is present day part of Abiquiu, called El Pueblo de Moqui. Moqui is the Spanish word for Hopi Indian. So and then along that, it's set up as a Genízaro land grant, and for the purposes as other Genízaros in the Santa Cruz administrative area as a place really ascending. So really, if you go to present day Abiquiu, you really have two cores of the village. You have the Santo Tomás, the Pueblo de los Genízaros, which is at the bottom, which was mainly primary, eventually kind of mixed. They say there was 14 different indigenous populations in the Pueblo of Abiquiu in that period. The upper village was is the Pueblo de Moqui. That's actually where my great-grandmother was from. She was an Archuleta from there. And then after that, then you have, then what happens is they want to, before the peace accord, they want to settle two settlements in the Sandias. One is the Cañón de Carnue. Carnue comes from a word called, in Tiwa called carné. And so they Hispanicized it, which means badger place. So right at the edge of the Eastern Sandia Mountains where I'm from, is our community was set up in 1763 as a buffer land settlement, primarily related to the Comancheria. The northern settlement of the Sandia Mountains is the Las Huertas land grant. And both of my grandparents and my grandma and my grandpa were both members of both communities, because both of my great-grandfathers were from Las Huertas, and both of my great-grandmas were from Carnuel. So they were always back in between. 1767, Las Huertas is added at the north face of the Sandias to protect the pathway. And then later after that, you had Ojo Caliente for a moment, and then you had Ranchos de Taos, where a lot of the Tiwa, the Tewa Tano folks that were living in the village of Pueblo Quemado, they landed up little by little migrating into Ranchos de Taos and to help populate the Cristobal de la Serna land grant. And so that's how that was settled. Then you had the Peñasco region where Genízaros were sent to buffer and protect the San Sebastián land grant to the east. And then you also had the Las Trampas land grant, which was the pass into kind of like the pass in Peñasco to protect the raids coming down to the Santa Cruz de la Cañada. And then finally, the last one was San Miguel El Vado. As we talk in the book, for many, the history of basically the Indian part of town of Santa Fe is called Barrio Analco. This goes back to the time when the, we think about the Spanish coming in, but when we even go back to De Vargas, a huge amount, not De Vargas, we talked about going to talk a discussion about Oñate. Oñate came in, but really he came in. The reason he was able to kind of push forward was because the Tlaxcalan Indians, and that's chapter 1, and I'll go into chapter 1 and going into the chapters in a minute, but the first infusion of indigenous blood into the Spanish population in Santa Fe was the Tlaxcalan people, because if you look at Santa Fe had a drastic line, right? It had the Rio de Santa Cruz on the north side, was the plaza in the Spanish district. To the south side, where the state capital is today, was the Barrio de Analco. Well, after the Pueblo Revolt, a lot of the Tlaxcalans left, and then, of course, they stayed in El Paso. Some of them came back, but after the going into the 17th century, if you look at the genealogy, and I work with Miguel Torres a lot, and I'll talk a little bit about his chapter in a little bit. So the first infusion is really the Tlaxcalans that we don't talk about, and I'll talk about that in the book. One of the things that we're known for, and the Pueblos has a little bit of gaining a reputation for it too, is chile, right? The Tlaxcalans were the ones that brought the chile to New Mexico and domesticated. So, shout out to them, because we wouldn't have New Mexico green chili or even Pueblo green chili. We could argue which is better. I actually like Pueblo green chili myself. And we can attribute their contributions even to this day into the chile. Then what happens with Analco is it starts becoming an influx in the 17th century. That's where the Indians reside, right? And a lot of them land up being a lot of mixed plains, Comanche, Ute, Apache, even Pueblo folks even land up there, right? And one of the first Pueblo scholars is a guy by the name of Dozier. Dozier wrote that the significant increase in the population, he's one of the first guys to say it's not, or the first scholars to say Genízaros weren't just of plains background. So there's always an influence on the plains nomadic people, or the Athabascan nomadic people, which were the Apaches and the Navajos. But he argues that no, when in the 17th century, to solidify Pueblo religion, if folks were still practicing kind of picking up too many Spanish ways, they would push some of the Pueblo population out. That's why in the village of Isleta, after the Pueblo Revolt, a lot of the Tiwa Pueblos were sent to the Plaza Valencia, because they couldn't live exactly in the Pueblo, so they were the Pueblo exiles. The village of Los Lentes is the south side of Isleta, and kind of just out the Pueblo edge. That was huge Tiwa settlements. You have Huachupangue, if you ever come across that in your genealogy. The Vigiles, a lot of Vigiles left Santa Clara Pueblo and were pushed into a place called Huachupangue. Same with the Okeawinge. A lot of the folks that landed up in Alcalde or Villita were exiles. So Dozier argues that it wasn't just the Pueblo, so Pueblo exiles landed up joining Genízaro settlements a lot of the time too. So San Miguel Elvado, that was where I was going with the Analco kind of piece. So Analco, what lands up them is they land up being pushed, the Comanche or Apaches at that time are raiding into San Miguel Elvado. So Pecos Pass, Pecos Pueblo falls apart around the early 1800s. Most of the Towa from Pecos joined their tribe, another segment of the tribe in Jemez. Through some of my research and research of other folks, we find out that Genízaros from Nalco were sent along with to join along with Pecos Pueblo. Some of our 14 families formed the San Miguel Elvado. So finally, this outer settlement, Genízaro territory, that is this borderlands between the Hispanic and Pueblo communities, is finally kind of comes into existence. Then the Mexican period, then you have out migrations into Colorado, other land grants, right? So we have the Sangre de Cristo land grants, migrations into San Luis, and therefore, and so forth, and that happens. So I'm gonna share a few slides and then talk a few about the chapters, and then I'll turn. I'll have. Let me jump in here, and then I'll have Virginia say a few words, talk about her chapter. All right, so if you can give me a thumbs up, can you guys see this image? So this is an image of Rancho de Taos, and the ritual dances that happen are on New Year's Day. So what they do is they have the Fiesta de Emmanuel, right, which is and they go through, they leave Taos, the main plaza, Ranchos de Taos, and they cruise through different segments of the settlement. And so what we're seeing is their version of the Comanches, right? So what happens in Genízaro communities, you have various prevailing dances that are emblematic of each Genízaro community, right? So this would be emblematic of Comanche dances in Taos on New Year's Day. This is an image of the Naniye dancers, which is the Pueblo of ABQ, which are mainly influenced by their Pueblo background, right? Because the Pueblos, because of their Hopi Tewa background, that becomes a basis of their dances. Even some there's even elements of Ute, puberty aspects of their dances, right? So their dances, Santo Tomas, which is right after Thanksgiving, and it's one of the great, awesome Genízaro feast days. And so we have Genízaro feast days, right? So that's why a lot of people think, oh, well, Genízaros are living in the past. No, we're living in the present because we still have our lands to maintain as land grant members, right? There's still a rancho, there's still a San Cristobal de la Serna land grant. There's an ABQ land grant, and there's a Las Huertas land grant. So this is me and my kids. We danced the Comanches, which symbolize after we would go on the buffalo hunts. So, or not after. So basically what in the calendar, if you read my chapter in the book, I talk about after San Miguel Day, which is September 29th, the Sandia Mountain communities would form a hunting party. And they would go and they would leave in October and they would go hunt the buffalo. And they would get salt from the Quarai area. They would trade salt and grow, and punche, which is tobacco. So to this day, I still grow punche, and I'm a traditional salt gatherer, and I'm teaching that tradition to the younger kids because that was a major trade item in the plains. In fact, I'm working to take 2 pounds of salt to the Comanche Museum in the next month to kind of continue those traditions, right? And so our people would go hunt the buffalo, or the men would go hunt the buffalo. They would meet the Comanche in Palo Verde, which is present day Amarillo. They would have their trade fairs. They would come back right before Christmas. And then they would bring back the buffalo meat, the buffalo hides that they would make into the Kiowas, which are the moccasins, all the wares and all the clothing was made out of it. And then also they would bring back captives. So this is actually a captive initiation dance that's done in my community. We have the matachines in my community, and we have one clown that's added, which is called the Perejunya, and her comes from the word Perejojo. So he represents our Tiwa grandma that was actually exiled out of Isleta Pueblo and ended up being actually symbolizes. She visits us only once a year for our feast day and our dances. So when the matachines are dancing, she descends down from the high mountain and she joins us, and she jokes with the kids and plays. And then the rest of the year, after the feast, she goes up in the mountain. She takes care of her grandkids all year. And we know she's intervening on our behalf because it's really windy, right? That's the way they tell us. This is Alcalde. This is the matachines there. And one year, the bull, if you ever seen the matachines, he actually, this Comanchito appears with the greenhorn, right? Do you see the greenhorn? That's emblematic of remembering that history, even the battle with Cuerno Verde near Pueblo, Colorado. So, I mean, these traditions aren't just continued by stories in books. What we're doing with the book is we're telling these stories how they're important today, right? So here's a map of some of the various Genízaro communities, right? And this is the petition for the 1733 of the Genízaros. This is an interesting map because it shows you where Carnué is situated, and you see the map from the 1700s, and it's described as the at the frontera Las Comanches. This is my grandma's photo from 1931. My grandma had a camera, and it's kind of showing the feast day. This is last year when, and I'm on the front. I'm right at the pointing at the screen. So that's me at the front of the right there, and this is just an image of how I still gather salt and still. So that's the salt lake that we gather salt. In the old days, we would go trade with the Comanches, right? So these traditions are not held away in that. So with that, I'm going to transition to just kind of a couple chapters in the book and just outline the way the construction of the book. So the book, we start off with how did the Genízaro start, right? And we start with kind of talking about the history of Barrio del Narco, right? In this colonial period, what's going on? What's going on? Then we go into the next chapter, Samuel Cisneros. He talks about the history of Belén as being the first Genízaro settlement. We move on to talk about what is it in Charlie Carrillo. He's a Santero. He's really well known in the Santero communities from Abacu. He talks a little bit about how archaeologists and anthropologists for years have been trying to understand the Genízaro. But he goes back and says, this is what we understand the Genízaro. The Genízaro is an adaptive person. You know, it's a 21st century Chicano, I guess you would say. Then we move on to talking about, we'll talk a little bit about folks in the book. Cristina Duran talks a lot about her coming to understand her Genízaro story. She just found out recently in the last several years she always knew she was Genízaro but didn't have the connection. How did she come to learn this story? What does it mean to her? Virginia Sanchez talks about, and I'm going to turn it over here in a minute or so, about this, the story of Genízaros in southern Colorado. And what does it mean in this basically the hybrid identities as it relates to culture in territorial Colorado? My chapter talks about the connection of land grants. We talk about Susan Gander talks a little bit about her story. It's about Genízaro identity. Then we move on. Michael Trujillo's chapter is excellent. It honors Benito Cordova, who is from the Pueblo de Abacu. We all consider the first Genízaro scholar who really put the writings into written form about who we are. He has a great folklore book in terms of his work is Benito Cordova. He was a really good friend of mine when I lived up in Española. We'd hang out all the time. Anyway, he wrote a lot. I think a lot of what it contributes to what we think about in terms of who we are as Genízaro. So we Michael Trujillo did a chapter. We have Levi Romero talks about the poetics, right? There's a lot of music. There was a band called Casi Indio out of Northern California, but the artist, you might not know this, is Jose Montoya. Jose Montoya is from by my community, and he moved and he was part of the Royal Chicano Air Force. He did the original graphics for the United Farm Workers, and he somehow was always drawn. And so he talks about some of the songs and some of the poetry of Jose Montoya. But although Jose Montoya is seen as a prolific Chicano artist of the Chicano art scene coming out of California, a lot of his visual representation come out of him growing up in the mountains of the Manzanos and Sandias as being a Genízaro about that. And then we go in talking about different poetics and literature where we can find this. I mean, even, you know, we don't think about it. We just lost Rodolfo Anaya. Rodolfo Anaya, one of the literary great Nuevo Mexicanos that connects us to our indigenous past, right? Then we talk about the genetics, right? The genetics, basically, there's a chapter by Miguel Torres that breaks down, like, even the folks that claim full-blooded Spaniard, what's happening to them. We lay out the book is there's ways to Genízaro culture through two ways. One is through the communities that still surround the mountain areas of the mountain, basically the mountain land grant communities, where there's direct tie to the Genízaros, or even through the slave trades. I mean, my family, through the buffalo hunters bringing slaves, even though we were the descendants of slaves, we were priming the slave markets of Santa Fe. Slave markets existed even through the peonage period they didn't get rid of the peonage laws until the late 1800s. In fact, the president of the United States even had to issue a special proclamation to New Mexico because slavery was still in practice after the Civil War, right? So, and then as it relates to like the wealthy families, like you have the Gutierrez who owned tons of lands in the South Valley of Albuquerque. Shoot, they had so many slaves. So even the wealthy Hispanos couldn't afford, they even were a product of bringing in these servants and slaves into their families, right? Then we end,
join the meeting.
And then the Teresa Cordova writes a great conclusion. Talks about her growing up in Trinidad, Colorado. She's a professor of planning as well. Right now she runs the Great Cities Institute in University of Illinois, Chicago. But she talks about her growing up in Trinidad, understanding that she was a mixed Apache Ute background. And then she went to Denver and became part of the Chicano movement, went to LA and always considered herself a Chicana. But how do her even, being part of the Chicano movement, coming out of Trinidad, growing up in Trinidad, Colorado, how does she reconcile today with her Genízaro ancestry, being from southern Colorado with roots to northern New Mexico? So that's in a nutshell the book. I'm going to turn it over to Virginia to talk about her chapter, and then I'll say a few closing words.
Okay. Hello, my name is Virginia Sanchez, and I'm a contributor to Nacion Genizara. And as Moises mentioned, my chapter deals with the identity, gender, and culture, and we're talking about Southern Colorado territory. By the 1850s, the term Genízaro was no longer used in New Mexico. And as we go into Colorado into 1860s, Colorado territory, then we find that we have no Genízaro communities in Colorado. So we don't see any of these types of dances or hear any of the Indita ballads. I'm going to correct myself. We do hear some of the Indita ballads, but anyway, we don't have some of the Genízaro traditional dances that are done in New Mexico. We don't have any of those here in Colorado. So my presentation kind of diverges from the Genízaro theme to talk about what was going on in Colorado territory. And most of this is an unknown history, so I hope you find it kind of interesting. I'm going to see if I can do my PowerPoint slide here. The host, can you allow me to screen share? Is that possible? Hello?
Hey, Bob.
Okay, no Bob. Well, anyway, I have.
Yeah, we'll try to set it up here.
Okay, all right. If we take a look at the area of general area of the Sangre de Cristo land grant and the Conejos grant, by 1818, those areas were considered a notch area on the map of New Mexico territory. Now, in 1860, Congress decided that it wanted a square state in the middle of the map, so they created Colorado territory. And it took this notch area from New Mexico to create the southern part of Colorado Territory. And in doing that, that impacted 7,000 Nuevo Mexicanos who were living in the area. Now, as far as the trade that was conducted, I have been able to find a number of trade licenses that were actually signed by Indian agent Kit Carson out of Abiquiu. And so we've got trade licenses by that have Carlos Bobien's name on them. Let's see, other people from New Mexico, or excuse me, from Southern Colorado would be Antonio Jose Vallejos and Jose Celedonio Valdez. So these names may be familiar in your families. But anyway, they were issued trade licenses either for 1 to 3 months. And some of them also allowed the traders to go as far as the Saguache area in Colorado. So that's an interesting set there. Along with, let me get to where I want to be here. Along with these trade licenses, then I was looking for trade routes from, well, the traders. When we talk about traders, we're talking about the Comancheros, okay? And they traded with the Indians. Now, mostly they traded with the Ute because Colorado was Ute country, but they also traded with the Navajo and the Comanche and other nations. In Colorado, we have some histories of the trade routes that were taken. And in doing that, I found that there were 88 Comancheros who were on trading or a raiding campaign into the Moqui Indian area, which is near the Hopi, the Three Mesas, near well, it's in Arizona territory now. But anyway, of the 88 Comancheros that were there, 6 of them were from Abiquiu, 8 were from Conejos. 1 was from Huérfano County and 3 from Mora County. And then we've got, you know, the rest of them coming from Tierra Amarilla, Taos, Rio Arriba. Ojo Caliente had 3 raiders in the band. So of the 88 men, they divided into 2 groups. One group was the raiding party and the other group was the one that kind of took care of the sheep and other livestock that they had raided. So that's an interesting story. If I can, I'm gonna try and play this and maybe you can hear it on your end, but it is an indita or a ballad, a Comanchero song that is called Si Fueras Pa Navajo. So in other words, it's saying, if you go to the Navajo, if you're gonna trade or trade with the Navajo, you must remember to be very careful because you could lose your life. So let's try this. Thumbs up if you can hear it. Can you hear it?
Barely.
No? Okay, all right. Okay, well anyway, it says, Si fueras pa Navajo, si fueras pa Navajo, pide a Dios que te rescate. And then I'm going to read the rest. Si es enemigo de Navajo. So this song is just basically a song that maybe the traders would have sung around the campfire or as they're slowly going on their trail, okay? Let's see, the other one thing I wanted, this is a part of, so we found a trail coming out of Mogote, out of the Conejos County area, and then they crossed over into Dulce, New Mexico, and then they've headed southwest through some of the canyons down there into the 3 mesas of the Hopi. So that was an interesting, I wish I could show you these pictures.
Virginia, this is Bob. You should be able to share now.
Okay, let me try. Okay, all right, so here we've got the little notch. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, we've got that notch. Oh, whoa, slow down, Virginia. Okay, and that was that notch that I was telling you about. So this is an 1818 map. And
I'm not seeing it, Virginia.
You're not seeing it? What did I do wrong? Okay, I do slideshow.
And then make sure you hit the screen that the image is on. So hit share screen, and then
Okay,
hit the image that you hit. It might show you a couple screen examples.
Yeah. If you move your cursor, you'll see the share screen down at the bottom.
It's the green button,
share screen. Okay, got it. Okay.
and then hit the image. There you go.
There we go.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So this image then just shows the the notch area in the upper right-hand corner. That was the notch that was taken from New Mexico and placed into Colorado Territory in 1861. And information about how it became part of Colorado is included in my book, Pleas and Petitions, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later, because this history is really important to us and we need to know what happened here. This is Jose Celedonio Valdez. Now, he had a trade license that was issued by Kit Carson. It was a 3-month trade license, and it enabled him to trade within any of the boundary that Agent Kit Carson had out of Abiquiu. So that came into Colorado, and it went up as far as into the Saguache area. This is a trade license, or excuse me, a receipt. I forgot the date of this, and I'm not sure I could read it from here. 1860. Okay, so in 1860, Lafayette Head is named Indian agent of the Conejos agency, but the agency hasn't received any government provisions yet for the Utes. So some of the people, the Hispanos, then would sell some of their goods and produce to the government, and this is a receipt. And it shows that he received $1,400 for sheep, wool blankets that were called Mexican blankets because they had the seam down the middle, and some other items. Let's see, fanegas there, fanegas of wheat. So that's the receipt that they were given. And then I mentioned the Comanchero song. I'm going to see if I can play it here. I'll just play a little bit. Can you hear that? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. No? Okay, well anyway, that was a Comanchero song. The trade route that I was talking about earlier, so they came out of the Conejos area, went over the mountains, the Caracas Canyon, into Dulce, past several more canyons, and then over into the Hopi. Now this is the trail that was used by the 88 people I had mentioned and introduced earlier. 8 of them being out of 8 of the Comancheros being out of Conejos. So it's an interesting history. I don't want to take up too much time, but this is an Indian doll, and it is Ute, and it either came out of Colorado or Utah. And it's the same period of time that I'm talking about, the early or the later territorial period. Then here's another Indita ballad, and this one's important because the Inditas were sung in first person, and they were usually from a female perspective. And here, this one's called La Cautiva Marcelina. I don't have the music for it, but here Marcelina is mourning the loss of her lifestyle, her children, her family, and this is Marcelina is a captive, so Comancheros then, or other nation raiders had captured her, and they were getting ready to sell her. She was going into, we're assuming, a Hispano, and in New Mexico, excuse me, and in Colorado, perhaps an Anglo household. This one, I'm going to sing it for you. And it's sung in a major key, which is interesting to me. La cautiva Marcelina, ya se va, ya se llevan, ya se llevan. I didn't do it right. But anyway, I believe that Indita ballads were sung in minor keys because minor key is more symbolic of being what's it called? Sorrowful, more sorrowful. So it would have been La cautiva Marcelina. Okay, La cautiva Marcelina. And I also think that these Indita ballads probably became or began being sung in major keys because they were used as nursery rhymes. And I'm saying that because in my research I found that Reyes Manzanares, she was related to, I think she was Olibama's grandfather, Olibama Tushar's grandmother. And she was familiar with the Indita ballads. And then Manuel Salazar, who now lives in Denver, Colorado, but was from Conejos County, also remembers his grandmother singing these songs. And they remember more in the major key, not in the more sorrowful one. And then finally, my chapter deals with the captives and the Indians reported out of Agent Lafayette Head's 1863 census. He did this census, he wrote, this is his handwriting for Conejos County. And then for some reason they had the US Marshal for Colorado interviewing captives out of Costilla County. Now, Agent Head did not interview any females out of this Conejos County census, but the marshal out of Costilla County did. So we have some females who are itemized as owning Indian captives. So basically what this report is saying is it'll give you the name of the owner, where they live, the name of the captive, their age, what nation they were from, and when they were purchased, and who they were purchased by, whether it was Comancheros trading out of southern Colorado, Comancheros, Ute raiders, and so this is an interesting analysis that I provide in my chapter, and I'll turn it back over to Moises.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. So I guess, to wrap up and then kind of emerge kind of what Virginia's talking about is folks that are on that list, on those rolls, and that's a small portion. I mean, you can even go to southern Colorado. Like, if we look at even Chief, not so much in our book, but just kind of just contemporize it. You think, Chief Ouray lived the lifestyle as a Genízaro captive in Taos. Went to Catholic school, then ended up, kind of rejoining the tribe and, landed up doing the major part of the negotiation for the Ute, right? So, and then, thinking about how many Utes that were in that area that landed up, on those lists that landed up now in Hispanic families, right? Hispano families in southern Colorado. I've some folks in Virginia's book, I've met a couple people that have been able to find those names of those Ute captives in their own genealogy. So we have, so that's kind of the legacy. So, and I'll sing a song, a quick one, and I'll explain it, and I'll just end it and we'll open up for questions since, you brought up the kind of the songs. This is a song my grandma used to sing to me, us as kids, and it goes, El Comanche, la Comancha, el Comanche, la Comancha, se fueron pa Santa Fe, a vender sus hijitos, por azúcar y café, por azúcar y café. Heya, 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 oh, oh, heya, 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 oh, heya, 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 oh. And those, so the song is like the Comanche, the Comanche man, the Comanche woman. They went to Santa Fe and they traded the Comanches. Well, probably not Comanches, probably captive Apaches or Kiowas. And they sold them on the Plaza Santa Fe for sugar and coffee, right? So, I mean, that says it all, right?
Yes, it is a very interesting history of New Mexico and southern Colorado. And in southern Colorado, we are only starting to hear about it. And Hey, Moises, I also wanted to give a plug for my book. I don't know whether
Okay,
you can
cool, cool,
do it
cool.
or not. Yes, this is Pleas and Petitions, and it is Southern Colorado Hispano history, which goes from 1860, well, a little bit earlier into the New Mexico period, but through the Colorado Territorial period, 1876. And I think we really need to know this history, and so that's why I'm plugging the book today. And my chapter again is in Nacion Genizara, as Moises is talking about. So I just wanted to mention that.
Virginia, this is Bob. We
Yes.
have your book at the Pueblo Heritage Center if anybody's interested.
Great, thank
Okay.
you. And let's see, Moises and I will be speaking this week at the Western History Conference. So we have a presentation that we're delivering this week on the Nacion Genizara subject.
Thank you.
Is that going to be on Zoom?
I think it's $60 to register. Is that right, Moises?
Yeah, basically you heard it here, but yeah, it's a $60 fee for Western history. I mean, you get other presentations though. I mean,
Mhm.
4 days of all the research that's going on through the Western History Association.
And they have a Zoom type platform that they're using, but you might look at the program, bring up the program online and view that and see if there's some interesting topics that you'd like to hear.
So with that, I guess let's open it up for questions.
Okay, Moises, if you'll give us a second, we have to unmute everybody. And what I want to tell everybody is that you can either ask a question. We need to turn on your video so that we can see. Please raise your hand if you have a question, or you can submit the question in writing and me and Tom will relay it to Moises or Virginia. So give us a second here.
Yeah, go ahead and turn on your video if it's off.
Yep.
Let me start out with a question since while Bob's doing that in the background. Moises, you mentioned that that there were captives from Genízaros. So am I to assume that Genízaros also had their own captives?
Oh yeah. So like, so that was kind of like what our dances, kind of like our winter Comanche dances. They're actually, so for example, my community, and I talk about this in the chapter. So Carnuel
You don't want the gallery?
and Las Huertas, they were very, our lands weren't the most productive lands. I mean, they're in the mountains. They don't have like the irrigated farmlands along the Rio Grande. So the buffalo hunts become the primary, and like, obviously there was folks in Virginia's chapter. You have folks that are actually making use of these trade fairs economically viable. So, so you're hunting the buffalo, you're getting the meat, and then the hides are very important because you figure in the early 1800s, people weren't wearing boots; they were wearing moccasins, right? That's around here anyway.
In Colorado too.
In Colorado too. I mean, people were they called Kiowas, and so all those wearers become very important. But what becomes more important is the captives coming back that are either some are stayed, but that they go into the active slave market. I mean, it's kind of weird that we have so much about slavery in New Mexico, but we don't talk about it. But there's a couple other books. It's called other supplemental material. There's Captives and Cousins by
good one. Yeah,
that's a good one. And then the other one is, man, it's a great one about the Utes. It's called Violence Over the Land by Ned Blackhawk. He's talking about Ute history from Ute perspective. Remember, Utes were pretty much tied in during the Ute-Comanche Alliance. Yeah, there I see Isabel has kind of showed it right there. There it is. If you look at Isabel Ramos' screen. Basically the whole story of the Utes, I mean, they're stealing the Paiutes. They're stealing the Navajo and selling them actively in these Santa Fe slave markets, right?
Okay.
Thank you, Isabella.
This is Bob. if people could unmute themselves, because you're not answering my unmuting question. So does anybody have, let me
Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question.
Well, Moises, I wrote a question, but I'll just do it verbally out loud. I'm haplogroup C when I do my DNA. Haplogroup C means I could be Navajo or Apache, I could be Mesoamerican, so they can't narrow it down because of the way DNA works, I guess. But anyway, I think it's interesting that Oñate brought all of these Tlaxcalan Indios with them, because I think a lot of Hispanics in New Mexico, when they're showing on their DNA, if they're showing indigenous, I think it shows this is where our mixed heritage comes from. You know, the Tlaxcalan Indians were one of them. They could have mixed with the Navajo or the Apache. Could you just answer that a little bit?
Yeah, no, you'll get into that into Mike's chapter, and Miguel Torres's chapter. So like, if you start out, New Mexicans even coming here, well, like, let's even break down his background. Oñate himself was half native, right? Because his mom was Zapoteca Indian from the Zacatecas area, right? So none of these Spaniards were coming with full blood anyway, from the get-go, right? And so what we find out that pays out in the in Miguel's chapter is that, you have these layers of history that are happening on. The first layer being, the mestizaje of the Mexican Indians, the Tlaxcalans. The next one is, kind of the mixing within the pueblos, and then this final layer is the kind of the Plains Indian experience. That's the late, kind of the 18th century. And the early, 18th century going into the 19th century. That again, where I started my talk, which is basically starts with the advent of, or the point in which the Ute adopt the horse, the Navajo adopt the sheep, and then the Comanche adopt the horse. I mean, the equestrian culture that we see on the Old Western really begins in that point of history, because the Comanches are the first groups to master the horse.
Moises, this is Bob. So I have a couple of comments, a couple of questions here that are written. The comment is, I really enjoyed this. It was very interesting. Thank you. Moises and Virginia singing was an extra bonus.
Thank you.
Okay, question from Rosa. What is the website for the Western History Association's conference?
Just Google it. I think Western History Association conference, and it'll come up.
And then the year 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this one was for Moises. This was from Carmen. Carmen, did you already ask your question?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have a question?
There's Karen.
Moises, my maternal haplogroup is A2E. And there is a professor in Venezuela who reached out to me not very long ago. And he says that my DNA, maternal DNA, is a perfect match with some people in the white Apache area of Arizona, and the Tarahumara, and in Puerto Rico. So I figure the white Apache Arizona tribe is probably the most recent. Were the Apaches traded everywhere or in particular areas?
Yeah, yeah. So the Hickory, so that basically what you're talking about is a Western Apache, White Mountain or Western Apache, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Western Mountain Apache were their trade areas were, or their raid areas, I guess you would say. It was encompassed all the way down to Chihuahua, Mexico, even around El Paso, even around what would be present day Silver City. The White Mountain are the Chiricahuas. The Chiricahuas are the group of the Western Apache. The Mezcaleros were pretty much on the kind of like the spine of the range in southern New Mexico, and they came up to Carnuel. Actually, that range came up to that area. Then you have the Jicarillas. We think the Jicarillas more by Dulce now, but the Jicarillas were like basically plain out towards Raton, Trinidad, out towards even to the eastern plains of Carnuel, the Sandia Mountains. So definitely, so when you get that knowing a little bit about the haplogroup, it gets complex because a lot of the nomads also have like Apache female lines have that A, but it also goes to some of the small portions of the Hopi and even down to, it makes sense that there's Raramuri, because the Raramuri and the Tarahumara, had historic battles between the Apache because they would raid them a lot. And there's a lot of stories in northern Chihuahua about that. So, let's put it this way. It's a sad period in the Mexican period, but the Mexican government, they put bounties on Apache kids, actually scalps, and they would trade them and put them into slave labor. And a lot of them were forced into mines in Chihuahua. So I'm not surprised that you come up Western Apache at all. That's pretty common. Mm-hmm. Common, but I mean, you're what's embodying that DNA is basically the stuff we're talking about.
Any more questions?
Kathy?
My question is for Virginia.
Okay.
Virginia, what years was Celedonio Valdez up into Saguache, Colorado?
Celedonio. You message me and I'll get that to you. I'm trying to remember. I need to let you know that there's a death record in the Our Lady of Guadalupe Church death records that is incorrect. He did not die, because I found him later in New Mexico as a probate judge. So the date that's, okay, no, I can tell you, because he was actually a legislator too. So he was a legislator. Celedonio. Oh, I don't want to take up too much time looking. Okay, he served in 1867 as a Colorado territorial legislator. And he is best known for the Conejos land grant, in trying to get that land grant confirmed. And there's an interesting story in my book about the back and forth of how they tried to get that land grant confirmed, and I think the shenanigans that went on with that. So, did that answer your question, sort of?
Yes.
Moises, this is Bob. I have a request to purchase some of your book for the Heritage Museum.
Okay.
Can I contact you afterwards to see how we do that with you?
Sure.
Okay. Linnell has put the address, the web address for the Western History Association. You should be able to see that in the on the right-hand side on the message.
Hey, Moises and Bob, the New Mexico Press that published Nacion Genizara is having some discounts this week.
Okay.
Through the associations. So wouldn't you be able to get that, Moises?
I think so. I'll have to go to their links. Probably the best thing is, and I know George has my email. Maybe he could pass it to you, and then I could send you those links to those discounted books they're doing this week.
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I know we can get them in the museum, because we just received Virginia's book too. We have 4 copies of Virginia's book.
Yeah,
So,
and you might try Colorado. The University of Colorado Press is also having discounts this week, so check that out for this book.
I got these books out of the University of Chicago. So, and anyway, any other questions? Okay, Rebecca Hunter. If my DNA shows I have 25% native from northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, does that make me a what you were talking about. I can't pronounce it. I'm sorry.
So that's kind of the thing. That's where we kind of talk about, like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the last chapter is kind of what Teresa's kind of pointing on. She writes about, but basically, the history, not necessarily knowing the particulars, but then reflecting on it and then talking about these stories of her families of being of Apache, Hickory Apache and Ute background. And so where are the things that was kind of the next stage?
Somebody has their radio on or TV, please turn it off.
So about the question at hand is, I think the question is almost, that's kind of we pose a book. Everybody has, if your genealogy is from New Mexico into Colorado by way of the 18th century, and we say in the book, 1/3 of the population in New Mexico by the 1790s was technically Genízaro. Everybody has probably, I'd be certain that somebody has a Genízaro ancestor in there. That's just the way it is. Pueblo ancestor too. The difference, that's why kind of going on where we end the book, and the question we pose is, but how many of us really take on Genízaro consciousness? Meaning we are consciously woke, awake, tied into the ways of Genízaro practices. And so that's kind of.
Are you familiar with the dances and the ceremonies and the background and the history?
And so I think that's where so I think Nacion Genízaro is a good one, kind of introduction to Genízaro, what it means. The next that scholars are doing is, what does it mean to practice or know songs like the ones Virginia's? What is the next step of connecting and connecting into an indigenous consciousness, right? And that's kind of like, so for example, in Conway, some of us are even Abacu. One isn't, so for example, for me, it's not just knowing that I'm come from a Genízaro background, it's participating in a community that is Genízaro. We have a Facebook page. It's called Genízaro Nation, actually, or no, what's it called? Let me look up the Facebook page. And so people go onto that Facebook page. They share stories, they share experiences, and it's called, it's a closed book, a closed page. It's called Genízaro Nation Community Forum, if you look on Facebook. And so we actually have a lot of members in Denver, Colorado, and whatever. We have folks in Utah, and they even have their own connections sometimes where they meet on their own and, explore different things. We, in terms of we show different recipes, we show different family foods, like what different people or different customs, we show dances from Abacu. And so I think the question is like, if you find yourself, understanding your Genízaro history, then how do you make a conscious effort in terms of getting connected to your consciousness, right?
Are there any other questions? Tom?
Moises, I have a record that shows a 4th great-grandfather and grandmother being married in Abacu in 1758. In the record, it says that they are Coyote and Coyota. What does that mean for you?
It's very, I have another friend, he passed away last week. He also has a great book. His name is Benito Gallegos. So Coyota is a complex word in the genealogy, and I'm sure many of you guys come across it from time to time. Coyota or coyote means two things. Literally in the actual state, or like, because there was an actual government sanctioned caste system that's actually in Mexico, in New Mexico. So the technical term in New Mexico would be, as it was applied, somebody who would have been half Pueblo Indian and half Spanish, right? We know that's not the case because oftentimes somebody was full-blooded Pueblo Indian and perceived as by a priest as perceived as taking on Spanish ways, they would use coyota or coyote for a full-blooded Pueblo person that might have just been outside of the rigidness of Pueblo culture. So a lot of times we find that coyota is actually so it could have been the priest in Abacu seeing a full-blooded Pueblo person, but saying, hey, well, they seem like they're living kind of taking on Hispano ways, so therefore we'll call them coyota. So a lot of times Pueblo Indians that are living in Genízaro communities or living a Genízaro lifestyle, they'll be full-blooded Pueblo Indian, but land up in the records as coyota, coyote.
Okay. So there's really no set definition. It all depended on what was put down by the priest or whoever wrote the document.
And that's why, yeah, because a lot of these people in the records, they're not defining themselves for themselves who they are. They have priests and Spanish officials saying who they are, right?
Yeah. The other thing is, it says in the record that they were vecinos de Puente. Is Puente another name for Abacu, or is it another little small town?
El Puente, just outside of, I mean, I'll have to ask. The one to ask is this guy Miguel Torres.
Yeah.
You can find him. I think he's even talked to your group or was going to talk to your group. But I think a Puente is down. It's down by the river. If you ever drive to Abacu, there's a store off the highway called Bodie's.
Yes.
The irrigated part at the bottoms. I'm pretty sure that was El Puente, and that's literally a stone throw from the plaza.
Right. Okay.
It's still Abacu.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, if there's none, I'm going to turn this back over to George.
Oh, I think you have Angie with her hand
Oh,
up.
okay, Angie.
Yeah, my family came from northern New Mexico and also to the southern Colorado. Has anybody in southern Colorado near Pagosa heard anything about a mountain called La Montaña de Dona Maria? It was Maria Nieves de Herrera who married the Mastro Gallegos.
Oh,
My great-grandparents.
okay. Message me and I'll take a look because I've done several genealogies on some of the captive Indians that I've researched. And so my email is Virginia dot, okay, VIRGINIA dot Sanchez, SANCHEZ at Comcast.net. And what was that name?
La Montaña de Dona Maria.
And Maria's name was?
Maria Nieves de Herrera. It was
Okay.
her maiden name, and she married the Mastro Gallegos.
Okay, I think I have some information for you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay, George, you're on.
Thank you very much for both Moises and Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you. This was good dialogue.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. Moises Gonzales, I want to thank you very much,
Doctor.
Virginia.